Hello and welcome to today's Health and Sanity Call with Dr. Joe. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a professional speaker who helps busy people stay healthy, sane, and productive. There's so many things that you can't control. You can't control the virus. You can't control the other people that you interact with, perhaps. But there's just so many things we can't do right now. And the purpose of my calls is just to help you think about all the things you can control, because that makes us feel like we're in control of the situation, helps us feel less stressed. So today I wanted to share with you, what the research is about caffeine, because let's face it, the coronavirus right now is introducing a lot of stress and worry, anxiety into people's lives. That while caffeine does help with focus and attention, too much caffeine can increase stress, anxiety, nervousness, irritability, can raise your blood pressure. So we want to balance that good taste, whatever it is that we like in terms of caffeine, with the benefits and also the side effects of it. So let's talk a little bit about caffeine and how much you need. Well, first of all, I shouldn't even say how much you need, because all the research studies showing that it helps with focus and attention do require that participants be caffeine users. In other words, of course, caffeine users are drinking it because it helps with focus and attention, but there are plenty of people who do not consume caffeine and feel that there's only detrimental effects to it. So don't feel like you have to use caffeine if you're not. But if you are using caffeine, how much is the right amount? How much is safe on a daily basis? How much can we have before it prevents us from getting a good night's sleep the next night? So most experts say 200 to 300 milligrams is a good amount, a safe amount. Anything over 400 milligrams is considered kind of controversial. And even if it doesn't affect you during the day, it still might affect you in the evening, and we'll talk about that. So what does that mean, 200, 300 milligrams of caffeine? Well, you probably have oftentimes heard that a cup of coffee has 100 milligrams. Keep in mind, when they say a cup of coffee, they're talking about a cup of coffee that perhaps in the movie, the TV show Mad Men, they would consume. So we're talking about a little cup of coffee. At Starbucks, it would be called a short. At McDonald's, it might be called the senior cup. It's a very small cup of coffee, about 8 ounces. So when you look at how much people are actually consuming, it's not 100 milligrams per cup. It might be 2, 3, or even more milligrams. In fact, a venti cup of coffee at Starbucks is about 400 milligrams of caffeine. So 400 milligrams of caffeine for just 1 cup. Now, again, you might say, well, I don't notice any nervousness or stress or anything like that. Realize the more we consume, the more our body gets tolerant to it, so we don't get the effects. We need a little bit more, but also it could still be affecting our nightly sleep. In other words, even if we don't feel the caffeine surging in our bloodstream, it still could affect it. But let's go back to morning time. Now, why do people consume 400 milligrams of caffeine? And they say, I need that much. No, 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams isn't going to do it. I need a lot. Or maybe they do drink one of those short cups, but they find themselves filling it up 2 and 3 times. Well, part of that reason is to realize how long it takes caffeine to get into your bloodstream. I mean, you're not going to even feel the effects for 10 or 15 minutes. It doesn't peak into your bloodstream until 30 or 45 minutes. So if you can guzzle a cup of coffee in 10 minutes, of course you're going to need more, because you haven't given the time that it needs for that first cup of coffee to get into your bloodstream. Plus, whenever I'm speaking to groups, I always remind them that when we get up in the morning and we think we need caffeine, maybe really what we need is water. And that cup of coffee is giving us some water. See, if you wake up in the morning, use the bathroom, make sure you turn on the light. Check the color of your pee. My guess is it's as yellow as this wall, which means you're dehydrated. So maybe a big glass of water before the cup of caffeine might actually make you feel more alert, more focused, because you're getting the water that your body needs. The human body is 60% water. And so just being down a little bit is enough to affect our energy level in a negative way. It can bring on headaches for some people. So get the water level up first and then add the caffeine. Now, is coffee or tea better? Interesting research shows that 50 milligrams of caffeine like you would find in a cup of tea versus 100 milligrams that you would find in a cup of coffee give people the same effects in focus and attention, even though the caffeine amounts are different. Isn't that kind of interesting? And people that have switched to tea also share with me, and the research supports this somewhat, is they tend to get less of that nervousness that they get with coffee. So tea drinkers feel like it keeps them alert, but also calm. So it's something else that you might have to try. I also remind people that it's important to think about using caffeine therapeutically. In other words, maybe consider going back to a small cup of coffee, 100 milligrams at breakfast or with breakfast, and then maybe another 100 milligrams mid-morning, and another 100 milligrams, a small cup of coffee, perhaps mid-afternoon. In other words, you might feel better than if you were to have a big mug of coffee first thing in the morning. Because again, that big cup of coffee might actually overstimulate you and increase nervousness and anxiety, which don't help with focus and concentration. Now, another thing to remember is that caffeine, even if you don't feel it when you go to bed, it's probably still in your bloodstream. Now, a lot of studies say that you should, if you want to get a good night's sleep, to stop drinking caffeine mid-afternoon. And so a lot of times people are trying to pin me down on what time that is. You know, are we talking like right after lunch, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock? You know, a lot of it depends on how much caffeine you've taken in. See, caffeine, as I mentioned earlier, is a stimulant drug, which means as soon as you drink it, the body is working hard to make sure it eliminates that drug from your body. It works this way with every single drug. And scientists know that every drug has a specific, what they call half-life, in which the body eliminates it. Some people have a faster half-life than others, but the average half-life for caffeine is 4 to 6 hours, which means in 4 to 6 hours, your body will eliminate half of the caffeine. So let's just say, first thing in the morning, at 6 o'clock in the morning, you have a venti cup of coffee, 400 milligrams of caffeine. So 400 milligrams of caffeine first thing in the morning. 1 cup, that's it. Now, since it has a half-life of 4 to 6 hours, and we'll go on the faster side, 4 hours. You might be slower though. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, how much caffeine is left in the bloodstream? What do you think? 200, right? 200 milligrams. That means you've cut it in half. But it also means at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which is another 4 hours, how much caffeine is left in the system? It's not 0. That means 2 o'clock, 200 milligrams will cut back to 100 milligrams, which means at 6 o'clock in the evening, you're at 50. At 10 o'clock in the evening, you're at 25. In other words, you're still eliminating caffeine throughout the day, even if you stopped at that first cup of coffee. Isn't that incredible? Now, is 25 milligrams enough to keep you up at night? Probably not. I mean, if you're tired, you're probably going to go to sleep. But if you're one of those people that has a hard time getting to sleep, every little bit of caffeine is just going to work that much harder to make it, difficult to get to sleep. Now, keep in mind, I'm talking about 1 cup of coffee. There are plenty of people who say, well, I really need another cup of coffee. So maybe at 10 o'clock in the morning, when they have 200 milligrams left in their bloodstream, they go and say, well, I'm going to have another cup of coffee. You're at 600 milligrams, which means at 2 o'clock, you're going to be at 300, right? 6 o'clock, you're going to be at 150. And now you're trying to go to sleep and you have the equivalent of a short cup of coffee still left in your bloodstream at that time. So people don't realize that it does take a while. Now, smokers do tend to eliminate caffeine from their system faster, which is kind of interesting. But certain people, like pregnant women, that's one of the reasons why they recommend that you cut back on caffeine during pregnancy, because this elimination process happens much slower. In fact, some studies have shown that it takes 24 hours to eliminate half the amount of caffeine. That's really, really slow. So, keep this in mind. Caffeine is a wonderful stimulant drug for those people who like the effects of it, or maybe they like the flavor of the coffee or the tea or whatever. But too much can increase irritability, your anxiety, your nervousness, can raise your blood pressure, and prevent you from getting a good night's sleep, all of which isn't going to help you in this particular situation with all the stress from the coronavirus. So one thing you can do right now is just take a look at your caffeine. Maybe you need to cut it back. Now, maybe if some of you are thinking, I need to cut out my caffeine, I would just recommend that you think about not cutting it out completely overnight. I don't know if you've ever done that, but other people have. Research studies have shown that when people cut out caffeine completely from one day to the next, they end up having a lot of fatigue, maybe even some headaches. They have grogginess, fuzzy-headed thinking. In other words, it's hard for them to, get through the day. So think about, well, how many cups of coffee you're drinking. Maybe it's just that last cup of coffee that you can cut back. Maybe you need to shorten the cups so you're not drinking as tall of a glass. If you're going to Starbucks, order one size down. Maybe you can fill up your cup a little bit less and slowly cut back that way. I know some people have switched to decaf coffee mixed 50-50 and with their regular coffee. That's a good way to cut it back. Or maybe that's too much. Maybe you just make it 75% caffeinated and 25% decaf, whatever it takes. Now, it's not just coffee and tea that have caffeine. You can find about 50 milligrams of caffeine in a can of Coke or Pepsi or Diet Coke. Some of the root beers have some caffeine, as do the orange drinks, so don't assume it's just Cokes that have it. You can also find caffeine in energy drinks, and most people find that energy drinks make them feel more stimulated than the equivalent amount of caffeine found in a cup of coffee. In other words, they might look at the energy drink and say, it's only 80 milligrams of caffeine. Why does it make me feel so buzzed? Well, that's because there's also other things in it, like guarana, which is a natural source of caffeine that oftentimes is not included in the caffeine that you find in the label. So, be careful about how much caffeine you're getting. It is fine to take it for focus and attention, but too much of a good thing isn't so good. Hey, Simone, great explanation from a caffeine lover. I know. And I like my Diet Coke. That's where I get my caffeine source. And it's incredible. A can of Diet Coke has 50 milligrams, but I can tell the difference between having one can and, oh my gosh, some days, like, let's just say you're at a park, which doesn't happen right now, and you're drinking Diet Coke because the water out of the fountain is warm, the bottle of water that you brought is hot, and maybe you get another Diet Coke. And I can feel, real buzzed after like 2 Diet Cokes. So then of course it's hard to get to sleep the next night. Or for those of you who say, I can fall asleep, but then I can't stay asleep, keep in mind that's probably still the caffeine that's doing it to you. Because let's face it, when we're tired, eventually our body is going to break down and we're going to fall asleep. But that caffeine could prevent you from getting into a deep sleep throughout the evening, and you don't feel as rested. It can make you feel like you didn't get as much sleep the next day. But again, it still could affect your night's sleep. And if you're already prone to anxiety and irritability and worrisomeness, during these times, it might be a good idea to try to find something else, and maybe switching to a cup of decaf tea. That's what I drink in the afternoon. So I don't continue. I only have my Diet Coke in the morning, and then I switch to decaf tea for the rest of the day, or water. But for me, I'm very sensitive to it. And if I even have a cup of caffeine, like a Diet Coke at 50 milligrams, it can affect my sleep. Something that didn't happen to me when I was younger, but now I'm getting older, it's a little bit harder. Reach out and send me an email. Bye.